If you're ready to take your life, your magic, your relationships, your business, every aspect of your being to the next level.
Longtime viewers might recognize the face from today's subject from the crawl of jerks in my pop series. When I first started digging into him, I thought he was just what the title says, a fake guru that focuses on magic and Satanism. But, as you'll see, he's that and so much worse. Who is Koetting? Let's take a look.
You're about to learn secrets that most people will never know about godlike power.
Koetting. Normally, on this channel, I am focused on debunking BS claims around religion and science, doing allyship work, and educating on Hellenism because there aren't a ton of resources out there for us. However, when I see a scammer on the occultism side of the community making bank off of desperate people, I can't sit idly by. A quick disclaimer before we get into it, occultism can be a valid form of spiritual practice. I've got several occultist friends and am dating a ceremonial magician. Magic is also a respectable spiritual practice. Cue cries from the more judgmental parts of the Hellenist community, y'all probably already hate me for my video on magic anyway. Satanism has many branches, as does demonolatry, and again, both spiritual and atheistic Satanism and various forms of demonolatry are generally valid and respectable practices. I'm not denigrating any of these things going after Koetting. What I am taking issue with is his unrealistic marketing and downright dangerous teachings. Unlike a few folks who went through his YouTube channel a while back and got after him, I actually picked up his books and got some articles from a friend that he wrote for an organization he was a part of and which, according to some sources, he at least publicly left. More on that later. And boy, this goes far beyond the initial shock factor reaction that a lot of folks have to Satanism. I'm used to some of the dark claims that can be made about left-hand path magic and the crazy goings-on and invocations of demonolatry rituals. But before we can get into all of that, we need to take a closer look at the marketing itself, because that's what drew my ire in the first place. I don't talk too much about the YouTube I watch in my spare time, but as a former victim of a so-called life coach, I have a soft spot for expose creators like Mike Winnett and CoffeeZilla that go after these crooks. Winnett in particular has crafted what he calls the Contrepreneur Formula, which is a set of marketing tactics that get-rich-quick schemers and gurus use to lure desperate people into their sales funnels. These tactics include the BS backstory, where the fake guru tells you about how broke and desperate he was before he found the secrets he's going to teach you in his course.
I look back at the beginnings to become a living God, and I can very clearly see all of the posts, the emails, comments, and even the personal phone calls that I got with people telling me, you're going to fail.
Value stacking, which is where a bunch of BS bonuses are added to make the course, book, or consultation look like it's worth more than it is. Overinflated value, followed by a discounted price, where the price on the webpage or in the video is slashed through for a limited time, quote-unquote, and cut down for an observed value to an equally absurd but much smaller number. BS testimonials, where testimonial videos and quotes are uploaded to the site or channel about how the course changed somebody's life. Scarcity, where the fake guru claims that there's a limited number of seats or that the program will only be available for a short time. Get-rich-quick claims, or conversely, claims of extraordinary results through coaching or mentoring, seems pretty self-explanatory.
Hey, it's Koetting. Today I want to talk to you about how you can renovate your entire life through black magic.
Pressure to commit, leveled throughout the presentation or video.
I'm not here to take your power. I'm not here to get your worship. I'm here to help you. And I'm going to help you by empowering you. That's exactly what this ritual is going to do. So go ahead and sign up right now.
And finally, claims of special knowledge. Only the fake guru has the truth, and there are posers and pretenders out there who will deceive you, but you're getting real value from the guru.
For I am walking darkness. I've known for a long time that I'm playing a role here in this world, that I have been since my birth, since a million births probably. While ceremonial magicians are trying to become gods, they're performing these operations of assuming these god forms. I have been here as a god, assuming the form of a man.
Let's see how Koetting's channel and sales page stack up against the formula.
You're about to learn secrets that most people will never know about godlike power.
Well, right off the bat, we have a claim of extraordinary results. The video is called Ignite Your Spiritual Ascent and is the video at the top of his channel when you first come in as an unsubscribed newbie. It's unlisted, but there's a link to it, all my sources, and every other video I'll be quoting in the description.
I have some important questions for you, so please be honest with yourself as you answer them. Would you like to awaken your clairvoyance so that you can scry directly into the astral plane? see and communicate with spirits, and even receive visions of future events before they happen? Have you ever wanted to evoke an angel or a demon to physical appearance so that it can skyrocket your results with love, money, defense, and spiritual ascent? Wouldn't you love the ability to go out of body, astral travel, and even rise to the level of absolute godhood?
Extraordinary results times 50. Rise to the level of godhood. Are you freaking kidding me? Shortly afterward, he appeals to the viewer about raising the Kundalini, about black magic, Qliphoth, and Norse sorcery. This is supposedly the path to godhood he alone can teach us.
Over the last 2 decades, I've mastered the godlike powers of divination, evocation, soul travel, and energy work. But I'm not special. You can do it too. You can experience real results, and even surpass mine, when you use the priceless magic knowledge and ultra-powerful tools that I'm about to give you, totally free. When you subscribe to my channel right now, you're going to receive full, uncensored access to all my high-definition videos, insightful interviews with magicians and witches, and huge discounts on all of my training programs and magic grimoires.
I mean, you don't need to subscribe to get all that. I'm not subscribed and I can see all the videos just fine. But note at the end where he talks about discounts to all his grimoires and training programs. This is the real goal behind getting you to subscribe. That and funneling you to his Patreon, which admittedly has close to the same number of folks in it as mine. Go ahead and take a look at those subscriber numbers and I'll let you kind of make your own conclusions. He pushes these programs heavily in every one of his videos, including the pay-to-play group rituals, which he and those who appear to work under him do from time to time. Since when does it cost money to do a religious ritual directly in the pagan community? Most gatherings only ask for small willing donations if they need them for the cost of materials and or space, nothing more. Well, this is where I started with Koetting, going through his YouTube channel, checking out his videos, and eventually picking up his book pack to see what all the fuss is about. Keep in mind, back in my occult days I had 2 teachers, one from the builders of the Adytum, and the other was a former student of one of the heads of the Golden Dawn. In other words, I know my shit when it comes to the occult. So let's give the books a fair review. There are 9 books currently on sale from Koetting's website that he claims to have authored entirely himself. Their titles should be on the screen now, and I read them. All of them, over the course of the last 2 months. And a few major patterns stand out to me, and they're all red flags. Flaming, screaming, howling red flags. Note, first off, the overinflated value here. $441 slashed down to just $200 if you buy all 9 at once. Otherwise, they're $50 a piece. Oof. I have paid less than that for reputable scholarly books from university presses, and those are notoriously expensive. The first book listed in the pack is called The Kingdoms of Flame, a grimoire of evocation. The book opens with the Skeleton Cipher, a bizarre and twisting self-fanfiction about Koetting somehow being such a natural badass at magic that in his 20s, the superiors at a cult he was a part of gave him a cipher no one had been able to solve and told him to have at it. Nothing special at all about you, Koetting, huh? Nothing at all. He admits at the end that it's partially fiction, but claims that the real-world events were actually even more unbelievable, so he fictionalized that stuff. As if this crazy, page-packing diatribe was somehow meant to be easier to swallow. At the bottom of the first page, he claims that he spent most of his childhood in guided meditations and being instructed in the dark arts by his adopted father, who was the one who guided him to the cult that eventually gave him what he claims is the material he presents in this book. He also gives the, well, there are people mad at me for revealing this information in the cult, but I had to, excuse toward the end. But for now, put a pin in the father thing. We'll come back to it later with a different book. What follows is a book largely composed of so-called magic squares, peppered with anecdotes about how these squares came into his possession. In traditional pagan paths, we would call the majority of this grimoire, if not the whole, UPG, or Unverified Personal Gnosis. To date, I have found few if any forces that can corroborate his so-called secret information, which I guess would make sense if the story he tells is true, so this is definitely not VPG. However, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which, what's strange to me, is that the squares don't seem to follow the magic logic of any training I received. He even notes this when he talks about how chaotic they are, and the realms he goes to have an organization I haven't seen outside of his books in occult circles. Funny that. Before we move on, we find claims in this book that one can physically manifest a demon into one's sight if they have prepared enough mentally for the event. If it hasn't happened yet, though, it's the person's fault that they weren't ready, not the fault of the invocation. We'll see this as a common theme from his YouTube videos to other works with the constant claims that he's managed to do it, but he's not special, just dedicated. You can do it too, reader, just buy his books. The next book, Works of Darkness, is the first place where major red flags go off. In Kingdoms of Flame, we get the usual extreme claims of efficacy. In Works of Darkness, we get an ascension of magic structure identical to that of a dangerous cult associated with right-wing extremist groups and the first advocation for human sacrifice. Yeah, you heard that right. We'll get into associations with this group later, but one point of evidence towards that idea that he was once a member of a cult that spawned off the Order of Nine Angles shows here, where he talks about the stages of ascension for a black magician. The first, he says, is Dabbler, and he routinely mocks dabblers for their supposed inability to devote themselves fully to the craft to get their sinister aims met. The second is Neophyte, where the magician has supposedly shed his old beliefs and now begins his ascent into darkness. The next stage, Practitioner, is when the magician begins practicing regularly and seeing the results of the work. It becomes, in Koetting's words, a part of him. The next stage is Curious for someone who claims to be able to give all the secrets to his flock, Initiate. He advocates for joining a black magic order and talks about how intimidating yet rewarding it would be to do so. He notes in a single sentence at the end that some people join mere communities as teachers or students, but the majority of the section is devoted to pushing the idea of joining a dark order or cult of some kind. Then, one becomes the Black Magician or Sorcerer, then finally the Adept or Master. He claims that after a Dark Night of the Soul, which, for those who are a fan of the writing tropes, is actually a concept that comes from Joseph Campbell's hero's journey narrative, the magician will, quote, have all that is his lower soul burned from him, and all that will be left is eternal. The Adept, he promises, courses pure will and can make happen all the things that he desires with the wave of his hand or a mere few thoughts. Ritual becomes meaningless. You're effectively a god on Earth. What's interesting is how the description he gives mirror those of the Order of Nine Angles, a white supremacist adjacent violent cult that advocates for, you guessed it, human sacrifice. The 7 stages for them are Neophyte, Initiate, External Adept, Internal Adept, Master of the Temple or Mistress of the Earth, Grandmaster/Lady Master, and Immortal. The document I found notes that sometimes Initiates are known as novices, Internal Adepts as priests and priestesses, and Grandmasters as maguses. What's interesting here is that the only stage missing from Koetting's concept is that of the immortal, and he claims later in his manuscripts that one can become a living god, so even though it's not listed in this book, I think it's safe to include it. This is extremely troubling for reasons we'll get into later, aside from how insane advocating for human sacrifice is in the modern day. He has entire sections on blood drinking, or sanguinary vampirism as he calls it, and psychic vampirism. Sanguinary vampirism, he tells us, is often a drive from birth in some people, and drinking the blood of victims, the most enticing of which is supposedly those who are unwilling, becomes a high that eventually leads the person into criminal addiction, and finally psychic vampirism, or stealing the life essence itself. That's a yikes for me, dog. He's outright encouraging his followers to kill or injure in order to drink physical blood in the hopes that they can absorb the life essence of the beings they take the blood from, and outright says in that section that human blood is the most potent. It gets worse from here, but remember, these people paid either $50 or $200 to be spoon-fed this crap. What percentage do you think is going to act on it? Later in this chapter, he gives detailed descriptions of how to set up a temple space specifically for human sacrifice, which he sees as crucial to the ascent to godhood. Let me go ahead and repeat that for you while the quote is on the screen. Human sacrifice is crucial to the ascent to godhood, according to this man. In the next book, Baneful Magic, he argues that killing indiscriminately with magic is also crucial for ascent, burning away the feelings of empathy and leaving behind sociopathy, I guess? He clearly sees the gods as sociopaths if empathy is what he's trying to strip from his followers. Note that his concept seems to be more like the Hollywood version of sociopathy rather than the reality of ASPD or antisocial personality disorder. I have 2 very close friends with ASPD and can tell you that not everyone with the condition is a serial killer, but I can also assure you that stripping yourself of empathy or being stripped of it through trauma is not at all what it's made out to be by Koetting. Both friends deal with some major life setbacks and struggles due to their conditions, and seeing it glorified here, knowing this, makes me sick. For example, one of my friends points out that you might not have the emotional burden of empathy to carry with ASPD, but there are also violent urges that most folks only resist through empathy. Fantasies about harming people are much harder not to act on, especially considering there is absolutely nobody has ever written a guide on how not to kill people, because the majority of humans instinctively flinch at the thought of acting out said fantasies. It usually takes extreme emotions to overcome this instinct in normal people, but folks with ASPD, there is no flinching. There is only the overpowering desire to act. This particular friend uses Zen Buddhist meditation to manage these urges, but notes that they mostly do so due to an attachment they formed prior to when the urges for violence became overwhelming. This attachment to them is more important than the hedonistic joy they'd experience by acting, but if it's ever lost, they could easily become a predator. They spent a good chunk of their childhood feeding birds that learned to trust them and eventually eat out of their hands. They would also catch them and sometimes let them panic and release them, sometimes squeeze and release, and sometimes they would kill. They wanted to know what killing felt like, and it felt like nothing in terms of guilt, but there was a high with that level of control over something's life. To kill and feel no remorse, they said, was to feel like a god, but feeling like and being a god are two very different things. As they got older, they came to understand that acting on those urges could land them in prison for life or worse, and that the high of control they got was addictive without the empathy instinct to curb it. They wouldn't wish their condition on anyone for this reason if nothing else, yet here Koetting is urging his followers to attempt to Pavlov themselves into becoming like my friend. Without these followers having the experience and tools my friend developed to manage this condition, this could very well result in a string of serial killers if they can somehow manage to give themselves ASPD. Current research is split on genetic versus environmental trauma factors, but is currently leaning toward a combination of the two, meaning these followers may just traumatize themselves horribly and ruin their own lives chasing a twisted ideal that was never a possibility for them in the first place. I don't have to explain the problems with this to my audience, do I? I mean, I'm going to anyway, but I'm gonna let you all sit in that for a moment before I do. There are many different examples of murder spells and baneful magic, and I refuse to go through all of them here. However, I will note that all of them include a fixation on the victim and specific rites meant to symbolize them, along with instructions to monitor the person and their life heavily to make sure the spell went through, and what signs to look for. This constant obsession with death and murder, even if one doesn't assume that the magic works as advertised, can at the very least through neuroplasticity wire the would-be magician towards potentially escalating violence. The advice he gives to kill indiscriminately and often over the smallest slights as the gods kill, quote-unquote, also primes the would-be magician to view themselves in a highly elevated light, creating delusions of grandeur and the delusion of immunity to consequences. The example of his own supposed murders in the book are pretty telling. He talks about curse-murdering an ex who supposedly slandered his name, another woman who accused him of abuse, potentially rightfully so if the shit in this book are anything to go by, and an older woman who he claims faked a disability in front of him and his younger brother. Note the very incel-like justifications and mentality here. This is echoed in his statements that black magicians have often been abused and swore to never put themselves in the position of victim again. This is the demographic he's pandering to. Lonely, probably young, mostly white men who feel entitled to some sort of godlike power because they feel they've been slighted by life. You know, the same people targeted by extremist groups. We'll get to that later. No matter what way you look at it, the shit he's teaching is dangerous. If it's efficacious, he's creating a small army of murderers and assaulters who think themselves above the law and wield the power of who lives and who dies at their whim. If it's not, he's encouraging people to effectively Pavlov themselves into believing this is who they are, while actively encouraging actual real-life murder and sacrifice, along with animal sacrifice and abuse. Meaning his teachings are bringing real-world pain and suffering into the world. And he's scamming people out of potentially hundreds of dollars to do it. He also demands cult-like devotion to the craft from his followers. I'll let him tell us himself the level of devotion the attainment of real results supposedly demands.
Nikki asks, can I invoke a spirit with only thinking the conjurations which will bring them forth, because I must be silent. I don't want my parents to hear what I'm doing. Okay, Nikki, I appreciate your circumstance, and can you do a full physical evocation? Probably not. Probably not, because you're going to burn some incense, you need to get yourself into a rapture state, you need to thrust yourself into the ritual so forcefully that you don't even remember that your parents exist, okay? I had a client who said, you know what, he'll start doing the ritual, and in the middle of the evocation, he'll start getting nervous about hearing things outside the temple, and like, maybe his house is about to burn down. You know what I told him? I told him, let your fucking house burn down. Let your fucking house burn down. But you do not stop that ritual. You do not distract your attention from that ritual. You let your house and your family burn. Can you do that?
Yeah. In another of his books, Ipsimus, he outlines through an incredibly long and rambling series of personal anecdotes a set of meditations he claims can help elevate the would-be magician to the divine. Though his writing style is tedious and filled with what I can only assume, given his arrest a decade ago for meth possession and the frequent references to acid, are drug-fueled rants that only sound profound if you're already steeped in his madness, I did find something worth pointing out for the exposé. He talks about his adoptive parents being members of the LDS Church. That's the Mormons for those of you who don't know the lingo. Wait a minute. I thought in his first book, his adopted parents were satanic cult members who taught him everything. He mentions fundamentalist parents in several other books as well, so I'm assuming the Mormon backstory is likely the true one, but still, it's worth pointing out that even he can't seem to get his own upbringing straight. For that matter, he talks about a soul being ripped apart by demons and fed on, along with accounts of eternal damnation and the inability to escape it as a black magician back in Baneful Magic and Works of Darkness, but in Ipsimus, he talks about visiting the Akashic records and seeing past reincarnations of his soul, leading him to realize that he's actually a god himself. For those who didn't grow up within the Christian mythos, damnation and reincarnation are basically incompatible. There's no theological or metaphysical justification for this contradiction given in either book. They're just both taken as fact. The rest of his books, much like those I've outlined here, start with long, rambling, seemingly incoherent narratives about his supposed incredible experiences with demons and angels, spirits and his own godhood, and then progress into more or less the same ritual formulae and suggestions from the previous books, just with different named entities and more promises of potential godhood. All in all, over half of one of them was spent on these ramblings, rather than anything that might be considered useful to those who aspire to become as evil as this man purports to be. He calls himself a killer in Baneful Magic, and I'd like to examine that claim a bit further. We need to take a look at who Koetting claims to be and what he's done. Koetting has claimed several backstories in our adventure through his books, the two most prominent being From Gates of Flame with Satanist parents and Ipsimus with his LDS parents. However, what he fails to mention is that he was involved with another cult, the Temple of Blood, spelled as you see on screen and quite difficult to find information on. How do I know? Well, fun fact, all the books he currently sells on his website were once sold in physical print from a publisher whose name is on the screen, but I won't even begin to try and pronounce it. And they were published under the name Archelaus Baron. Archelaus in this case being a term for a higher-up in the Temple of Blood. When I was doing research into Koetting, a dear friend of mine who used to be in a satanic cult forwarded me an article written by him that was used in their training materials. An article that encourages members to get military-style training and weapons proficiencies to kill random people, especially religious figureheads, in order to sow discord in the world and hasten the manifestation of the high demon the cult worships. This article includes tips on what bullets to use, how to dispose of a gun, and suggests additional materials, some of which I couldn't get on selecting targets from the parent cult, the Order of Nine Angles. As if that weren't bad enough, both the Order of Nine Angles and Temple of Blood have reports associated them with grooming, murder, and terrorism. Yeah, you heard that right. Order of Nine Angles in particular had associations with Atomwaffen, a militant far-right group linked with several foiled terrorist plots and currently under investigation by the FBI. Supposedly, this association messed up Atomwaffen's structure, what little there can be said of a structure, so badly that they hemorrhaged members for a while due to rampant Satanism. I'm not going to get too much into stochastic terrorism and Atomwaffen here, but if you're interested, I've linked a mini-documentary by an investigative journalist on them in the description below. Thanks to my friend Callan for letting me know about it. A brief overview for the purpose of this video, though, should suffice. Stochastic terrorism is the radicalization of people through non-organized groups and websites. Basically, it's the idea that some folks, through constant consumption of existing extremist messages and media, will eventually get the message that now is the time to be violent and do horrendous things, and so begin to act on those impulses, but without a direct order from a superior to do so. Atomwaffen operates under these principles, but takes it a step further by providing combat training and access to materials related to the construction of explosive devices for acts of terror. Think of them as basically a quote-unquote lone wolf factory for the far right. And yes, they are white supremacists. The Order of Nine Angles requires one of three things for self-initiation: either infiltrating law enforcement, committing a terrorist act, or infiltrating a right-wing group fully. Yeah, you thought this couldn't get any worse, didn't you? Temple of Blood apparently was no different, and according to the Daily Beast, so overtook Atomwaffen that the leadership recommended the terrifyingly horrendous book Iron Gates, published by TOB, which prompted the hemorrhaging of members I talked about above. Iron Gates is horrendous and includes stories about grooming. I'm not going to go into it. Don't even bother Googling it if you want to keep your sanity. Returning to Koetting, whether he has actually left the group or, as some folks in online occultist circles have speculated, only publicly left while still privately financially supporting them, it remains that he wrote these horrendous articles on human sacrifice, or quote-unquote culling, and advocated for domestic terrorism. He continues to do so, slightly more subtly, through the work he still charges for to this day. As if all that weren't enough, he and his cohorts posted a ritual to their YouTube channel that claims to use a sigil and a blood sacrifice from the would-be magician to give immunity to COVID-19 through magic.
Alright, hello everyone, I'm JS Garrett, and I'm making this video in regard to the recent pandemic that is sweeping across the world, the COVID-19 virus or coronavirus. Now, this particular ritual demonstration is a very simple working that any of you can do on your own, whether you're a magician or not, in order to protect yourself from this virus. And you can even do this on behalf of someone else that you know or care about. Now, before I do the demonstration, I want to explain a little bit about what I'm doing here. Now, when it comes to a virus, I believe that the virus has a consciousness. Okay, the spirit of the virus is what Charlotte would call that. It's the consciousness behind the energy that is creating the physical manifestation of the virus on this physical plane. Now, in olden times, whenever plague or famine threatened a group of people, what they would try to do is commune with that consciousness and make allies with it.
The disclaimer in the description states that it can't replace medical advice, but does he say that during the ritual? Nope. And be honest with me, how many of you actually click my descriptions and read them? Or anyone's for that matter? Probably not a lot. YouTube statistics put it at less than 50% at the very least. As though, on top of the terrorism, we needed even more BS. Link is in the description to that video if you really want to burn out your eyeballs with stupidity. Oh, and when I mentioned the outrageous prices for his quote-unquote books, most of which are under 300 pages, I failed to bring up his personal consultations and performed rituals, which, as of this writing, sit at over $200 and $1,600, respectively. For the latter price, you get a personal recording of Koetting performing the ritual for you to prove he did it. How nice. His promises include turning a crush into an obedient sex pet, raising a business empire out of nothing and maximizing profits, and evocation of any angel or demon to forge a blood pact. Or he could just amplify the power of your own magic. That's nice of him. All that for just about my mortgage payment? Sign me up, or, well, not. Because if you can't see this as a scam from the marketing promises alone, I don't know what to tell you. In conclusion, Koetting is a shining example of the BS Christians and anti-theists point to when they want to attack the pagan community. He's a predatory opportunist whose teachings and mindless profiteering are bringing real, tangible harm to his followers. I expect to get a fair bit of hate once his cultists find my video, but I hope that at least some of you that might have heard of him can be pulled away from this rather dangerous and expensive road that he likes to lead people down. If nothing else, so you all don't end up in jail trying to become a living god. Again, I'm the last person to denounce magic, Satanism, demonolatry, or occultism. Those concepts are not the issue here. The issue is his predatory targeting of those in dire straits, bilking them out of hundreds or even thousands for teachings that could very well end up with his followers in jail if they go through the full process he outlines. And that's why I called him out. Happy Halloween, everyone. Or Samhain for the Wiccans in my audience. Thanks for sticking through that. If you're new here and you made it to the end, sacrifice the subscribe button and sound the bell that the hosts may hear of the Darkening Temple. Drop down into the comments and tell me which part bugged you the most, or tell me that I'm a sheep and too scared to embrace my godhood if you're a Koetting cultist. Special thanks to GaelicNox, as always, for their channel art. Links are in the description below to their Twitter and website. And special thanks to my patrons. This was a freebie for you all for October, on top of the Patreon bonus video that should be up pretty soon around the time this goes live, if not very shortly after. It was a wild ride researching it, and without you, I wouldn't be able to afford the materials I need to make my more scholarly and measured videos. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever be positive. And remember, faith ain't fear.